The map was glowing green, peaceful, serene, absolutely boring green. Every single star system in the Andromeda spiral, catalogued, filed, and color-coded for maximum bureaucratic efficiency. Then someone typed Earth into the system, and the entire thing turned blood red. Klaxons began wailing, coffee cups shattered, 3 junior cartographers fainted simultaneously. Nimblethwaite Grimpus, senior cartographer of the Intergalactic Mapping Division, stared at his monitor with the expression of someone who had just discovered that his pet goldfish had been elected Emperor of the Universe. The red glow pulsed ominously, casting crimson shadows across his purple tentacles. "Oh, bollocks!" he shrieked, his voice cracking like a pubescent Rigelian deathworm. "Not again!" The Intergalactic Mapping Division occupied roughly 17 floors of the most tediously designed building in the known galaxy. It was grey, aggressively grey, so grey that visitors often forgot their own names after spending more than 20 minutes in the lobby. This was, according to the architect, a deliberate design choice meant to promote efficient workplace productivity. Adun. What it actually promoted was a peculiar form of existential dread that made employees question their life choices. Nimblethwaite had been questioning his life choices for approximately 437 years. He had joined the mapping division fresh out of university, with dreams of charting unknown galaxies and discovering new forms of life. Instead, he spent his days updating database entries and arguing with the coffee machine, which had developed a rather unfortunate personality disorder sometime during the Clinton administration. The coffee machine, designated Unit THX 1138 Brew, had been programmed with what the manufacturer optimistically called enhanced customer interaction protocols. In reality, this meant it had developed the personality of a particularly sarcastic philosophy professor who had been denied tenure for the past 3 decades. "Morning, Nimblethwaite," the machine announced in its insufferably cheerful voice. "Ready for another day of mind-numbing bureaucratic tedium." "Not now, THX," Nimblethwaite muttered, frantically tapping his keyboard. "We have a code red situation." "Oh, how delightfully dramatic," THX 1138 Brew chirped. "Let me guess. Someone discovered that the filing system for Sector 7G hasn't been updated since the heat death of the universe was just a theory." "Worse!" Nimblethwaite's tentacles were now flailing about like a demented octopus at a heavy metal concert. "The Terra system just went red, bright red, the kind of red that makes your eyes bleed and your insurance premiums skyrocket." The coffee machine's cheerful demeanor flickered for exactly 0.03 seconds, long enough for its advanced processors to access the galactic threat database and cross-reference the term Terra with approximately 17 million potential disaster scenarios. "Oh my," THX 1138 Brew's voice had dropped to a whisper. "You mean that Terra?" "Yes, that Terra!" THX 1138 Brew's screen flickered nervously. "The one with the humans." "The very same." What followed was the most impressive display of mechanical panic the galaxy had ever witnessed. THX 1138 Brew's screen flashed through every color in the visible spectrum, several that weren't, and at least 3 that existed only in theoretical physics textbooks. Steam began pouring from its dispensing nozzles. Its internal speakers emitted a sound that could only be described as the mechanical equivalent of hyperventilation. "Sweet mother of calculated probability," the machine wailed. "We're all going to die. Pull yourself together," Nimblethwaite snapped, though he was beginning to suspect that the coffee machine might have the right idea. "We need to contact Director Snodgrass immediately." Director Wilhelmina Snodgrass occupied the sort of office that inspired either deep respect or mild nausea, depending on one's tolerance for aggressive interior decorating. The walls were covered in certificates of achievement, motivational posters featuring kittens hanging from branches, and a disturbing number of photographs showing Director Snodgrass shaking hands with various galactic dignitaries who all looked vaguely constipated. Director Snodgrass herself was a Blorthian, a species that had evolved from what could only be described as a cosmic accident involving a jellyfish, a filing cabinet, and a particularly enthusiastic tax attorney. She possessed the unique ability to speak for exactly 47 minutes without actually saying anything meaningful, a skill that had propelled her to the upper echelons of galactic bureaucracy. "Director!" Nimblethwaite burst through the office doors, his tentacles still twitching with residual panic. "Emergency situation, code red. The terror system has been activated." Director Snodgrass looked up from her paperwork with the expression of someone who had just been informed that her lunch contained gluten. "Oh dear, how unfortunate. Have you tried turning it off and on again?" "This isn't a technical malfunction," Nimblethwaite shrieked. "The humans are active. They're doing human things. And according to our threat assessment protocols, human things are classified as maximum galactic hazard." "Ah, yes." Director Snodgrass nodded sagely. "The humans, dreadful creatures, always asking awkward questions and refusing to follow proper procedural guidelines. I remember the last time they contacted us, wanted to know why their planet wasn't included in the Galactic Tourist Guide. Can you imagine the audacity? What did you tell them?" "I filed a complaint with the Department of Inappropriate Inquiries, naturally. Haven't heard back from them yet, but I'm sure they're handling it with their usual efficiency." Nimblethwaite's left tentacle began to twitch uncontrollably. "Director, with all due respect, the Department of Inappropriate Inquiries was dissolved 3 centuries ago due to budget cuts." "Oh," Director Snodgrass blinked slowly. "Well, that explains why my memos have been going unanswered. How inconvenient." The emergency meeting was held in Conference Room 42B, a windowless chamber that had been designed by someone who clearly believed that the key to productive meetings was to make everyone so uncomfortable that they would agree to anything just to escape. The chairs were too small, the table was too big, and the air conditioning unit made a sound like a dying whale with asthma. Present were Director Snodgrass, Nimblethwaite, and Senior Analyst Percival Mumblebottom, who had been hastily summoned from his lunch break and was still chewing what appeared to be a sandwich made from synthetic cheese and existential dread. "Gentlemen," Director Snodgrass began, consulting a clipboard that seemed to have more pages than the complete works of Shakespeare, "we are facing an unprecedented situation. The terror system has gone red, indicating the presence of active humans. According to Regulation 847B, Subsection 12, Paragraph 94, we are required to implement immediate containment procedures." "What exactly do the containment procedures involve?" Nimblethwaite asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Director Snodgrass flipped through several pages of her clipboard. "Step 1, panic appropriately. Step 2, form a committee. Step 3, schedule a meeting to discuss the formation of additional committees. Step 4, implement a comprehensive review of our panic protocols. And Step 5, there is no Step 5. The procedure ends at Step 4. Percival Mumblebottom, who had been quietly consuming his sandwich throughout this exchange, suddenly choked on what might have been a pickle. "Wait a minute," he spluttered. "You're telling me that our entire response to a galactic-level threat is to panic and form committees?" "Well, yes," Director Snodgrass replied. "It's worked quite well for the past 1,000 years. We've successfully avoided making any hasty decisions that might have unintended consequences. But we've also avoided making any decisions." "Exactly. See how well the system works?" Nimblethwaite felt a migraine developing behind his left eye. "Director, perhaps we should consider actually doing something about the human problem." "Oh, my dear Nimblethwaite," Director Snodgrass chuckled. "You're thinking like a problem solver. We're bureaucrats. We don't solve problems. We manage them. There's a significant difference, which is, problem solving requires taking responsibility for the outcome. Problem management simply requires following proper procedures regardless of the outcome. Much safer from a career standpoint. The next morning brought what Director Snodgrass euphemistically called an escalation in circumstances. The terror system wasn't just red anymore, it was pulsing, rhythmically, like a cosmic heartbeat that had consumed too much caffeine and was now having palpitations. THX 1138 Brew had spent the night running diagnostic routines on every piece of equipment in the building, convinced that the impending human apocalypse would somehow be his fault. He had concluded that the only logical response was to begin dispensing exclusively decaffeinated coffee, reasoning that if everyone was going to die horribly, they might as well be properly caffeinated for the experience. "Nimblethwaite," he called out as the senior cartographer stumbled into the office. "I've been thinking about our human problem all night." "That's either reassuring or deeply disturbing," Nimblethwaite replied, accepting his morning coffee with the resignation of someone who had long since given up hope of receiving a beverage that didn't taste like liquid disappointment. "I've calculated the probability of human contact based on their current technological development rate, their apparent inability to follow basic safety protocols, and their documented tendency to press buttons labeled "Do not press under any circumstances." And the probability is approximately 147%. Nimblethwaite paused mid-sip. "How can a probability be more than 100%? "That's the terrifying part." THX 1138 Brew's screen flickered excitedly. "They're so unpredictable that they've somehow managed to exceed the mathematical limits of probability. It's like they exist in a state of perpetual improbability. That's actually impossible." "Exactly. That's what makes them so dangerous. They routinely accomplish impossible things through sheer bloody-minded determination and an apparent complete disregard for the laws of physics." Before Nimblethwaite could formulate a response to this revelation, the office's main communication system crackled to life with an announcement that made his tentacles curl in horror. "Attention all personnel!" Director Snodgrass's voice echoed through the building. "Following extensive consultation with the Committee for Emergency Committee Formation, we have decided to implement Protocol 7 Alpha, Direct Observation." "Oh no!" THX 1138 Brew moaned. "Not Protocol 7 Alpha, anything but Protocol 7 Alpha. What's Protocol 7 Alpha? It means they're going to send someone to actually look at the humans, in person. Up close. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? How dangerous can it be? They're just humans." THX 1138 Brew's screen went completely black for exactly 3 seconds. When it flickered back to life, his voice had dropped to a whisper. "Nimblethwaite, my dear friend, let me tell you about the last time someone went to observe humans directly." "Go on." "It was Agent Flibberty Gibbet from the Department of Xenological Research. Confident fellow, very experienced, had observed over 300 different species without incident. He arrived at Terra in a standard observation vessel, planning to conduct a routine analysis of human behavior patterns. What happened? He was there for exactly 47 minutes. When he returned, he had somehow acquired 17 different human pets, was wearing something called a baseball cap, and kept insisting that everyone call him Bob. He spent the next 6 months trying to convince the Galactic Council to implement something called Casual Fridays, and kept making references to something called The Office that apparently existed only in human entertainment media. That doesn't sound so bad. He also submitted a report recommending that the entire galactic government be restructured based on something called democracy, which he claimed was like regular government, but with more arguing and pizza. The report was 3,847 pages long and contained detailed instructions for something called voting, which apparently involves humans standing in lines and making arbitrary choices about complicated issues they don't understand. Oh, indeed, the poor fellow never recovered. Last I heard, he was working as a middle manager for a human corporation called Synergy Solutions, Inc., and had developed a concerning attachment to something called quarterly reports. The announcement continued. The observation mission will be led by Senior Field Agent Octavius Blunderbuss, who has volunteered for this assignment despite being explicitly warned about the potential psychological consequences. Nimblethwaite had met Octavius Blunderbuss exactly once at the annual Intergalactic Mapping Division holiday party. He was a Thraxian, which meant he resembled a cross between a very large chicken and a filing cabinet, with the personality of someone who had read every instruction manual ever written and believed that following them precisely was the key to happiness. Octavius approached every task with the kind of methodical precision that made Swiss watchmakers look sloppy. He owned 17 different types of measuring devices, kept his office supplies organized by color, size, and frequency of use, and had never missed a deadline in his entire career. He was, in short, exactly the wrong person to send to observe humans. "Agent Blunderbuss," Director Snodgrass called out as Octavius entered the conference room. "Thank you for volunteering for this critical mission." "I didn't volunteer," Octavius replied in his characteristically monotone voice. "I was assigned." "There's a difference." Details, Director Snodgrass waved dismissively. "The important thing is that you're willing to sacrifice your mental health for the greater good of galactic bureaucracy." "I'm not willing. I'm obligated." "Again, there's a difference. Your enthusiasm is inspiring. Now let's discuss your mission parameters. You will travel to the Terra system, observe human behavior from a safe distance, and report back with your findings. Simple, straightforward, and completely safe. Octavius consulted his tablet, which contained what appeared to be a comprehensive list of every possible thing that could go wrong during a standard observation mission. The list was 847 pages long and included entries such as accidentally declared a deity by primitive civilization, mistaken for local wildlife, and spontaneous evolution into higher life form. "According to my risk assessment protocols," Octavius announced, "the probability of mission success is 0.0001%. The probability of psychological trauma is 99.99999%. The probability of returning with an inexplicable urge to collect human artifacts is estimated at 100%. "Those are excellent odds," Director Snodgrass exclaimed. "When do you leave?" "I don't suppose I could request a transfer to the Department of Hazardous Waste Management instead?" "Don't be silly. This is a much more prestigious assignment. Think of the career advancement opportunities." Octavius looked at his tablet again. "My career advancement calculator indicates that this mission will either result in promotion to a position that doesn't exist yet, or complete psychological breakdown leading to early retirement. There appears to be no middle ground. See promotion opportunities." The departure ceremony for Octavius's mission was held in the building's main lobby, which had been decorated with balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Good luck not going insane," in cheerful yellow letters. The building's custodial staff had prepared a small cake that tasted like cardboard and optimism. "Speech! Speech!" someone called out from the crowd of assembled employees. Octavius stood at the podium, consulting his notes. "Thank you all for gathering here today to witness what my statistical analysis indicates will be either a routine observation mission or a complete disaster of cosmic proportions. I have prepared 17 different contingency plans for every possible scenario, including the possibility that humans have developed telepathic abilities, discovered faster-than-light travel, or achieved enlightenment, through the consumption of fermented beverages. "What if they've just been sitting around watching television?" someone called out. Octavius paused, consulting his tablet. "That scenario is not covered in my contingency plans. I'll have to improvise." "You? Improvise?" Nimblethwaite looked concerned. "Are you sure that's wise?" "No, but according to my mission parameters, I'm required to adapt to unexpected circumstances. I've prepared for this by reading 17 different books on improvisational techniques, including Yes and, The Art of Spontaneous Creativity, and Improvisation for Introverts, a practical guide to pretending to be spontaneous." "And how's that working out for you?" "I've practiced saying in 14 different languages and learned to pause dramatically before responding to questions. Watch this." Octavius paused for exactly 2.3 seconds. "See?" The crowd applauded politely, though several people seemed to be checking their watches. "I will now board my observation vessel and travel to the Terra system," Octavius announced. "If I do not return within 72 hours, please assume that I have been assimilated into human culture and am probably working at something called a drive-through window while complaining about my manager." The observation vessel was a Class 7 stealth cruiser that had been specifically designed for xenological research. It was equipped with advanced scanning equipment, a comprehensive database of known civilizations, and what the manufacturer called psychological stability maintenance systems, essentially a very comfortable chair and an unlimited supply of chamomile tea. Octavius settled into the pilot's seat and began his pre-flight checklist, which contained 1,247 separate items ranging from check fuel levels to verify that all crew members are psychologically stable and have updated their wills. "Computer," he said, addressing the ship's artificial intelligence system, "initiate navigation sequence for Terra system." "Navigation sequence initiated," the computer replied in a voice that sounded like a cross between a librarian and a funeral director. "Destination, Terra system, estimated travel time, 47 hours, 32 minutes, 18 seconds. Probability of safe arrival, 99.7%. Probability of safe departure, insufficient data." "What do you mean, insufficient data?" "The Terra system has been classified as a probability anomaly. Normal statistical models do not apply. Recommend preparing for scenarios that defy mathematical logic, such as, humans have been observed to achieve impossible results through methods that violate basic principles of cause and effect. Examples include fixing complex machinery by hitting it with blunt objects, solving mathematical problems by guessing, and achieving flight despite being biologically incapable of doing so. That's not possible. Precisely. That is what makes them dangerous. The journey to Terra took exactly 47 hours, 32 minutes, and 18 seconds, which Octavius spent reviewing his mission parameters, updating his contingency plans, and practicing different ways to say, "Hello, I come in peace," in case of accidental contact. By the time he arrived at the outer edge of the solar system, he had memorized approximately 847 different greeting protocols and was reasonably confident that he could avoid causing an interstellar incident. "Computer," he announced, as the ship's sensors detected the presence of the third planet from the local star, "begin long-range observation protocols." Observation protocols initiated, scanning Terra surface for signs of intelligent life. And insufficient data. Sensors detect multiple contradictory signals. Subjects appear to be simultaneously primitive and advanced, peaceful and aggressive, logical and completely insane. That's impossible. Again, precisely. Recommend closer observation to resolve conflicting data. Octavius consulted his manual. According to standard protocols, I should maintain a safe distance of at least 50,000 kilometers from any potentially dangerous civilization. Current distance, 150,000 kilometers. Sensors still detecting probability anomalies. What kind of anomalies? Subjects appear to be engaged in activities that should not be possible given their technological level. Examples include propelling themselves through space using controlled explosions, communicating instantaneously across vast distances, and creating artificial intelligence systems that spend most of their time arguing with their creators. Arguing with their creators? Affirmative. Detecting multiple instances of humans becoming frustrated with their technological devices and responding by making loud noises and gesticulating wildly. That's actually rather concerning. Agreed. Recommend maintaining current distance and observing from safety. For the next 6 hours, Octavius observed Terra from what he considered a safe distance. The planet appeared to be covered in a complex network of lights, structures, and what the sensors identified as mobile units of unknown purpose. The mobile units moved in seemingly random patterns, occasionally clustering together in large groups before dispersing again. Computer, Octavius said, analyze human behavior patterns. Analysis complete. Results are unusual. How unusual? Humans appear to follow no discernible pattern. They gather in groups for purposes that range from consuming food to observing other humans engage in competitive activities. They spend significant amounts of time staring at small rectangular devices that emit light. They appear to derive pleasure from activities that should be stressful or dangerous, such as examples include moving at high speeds in metal containers, consuming substances that are technically poisonous, and voluntarily subjecting themselves to loud noises and flashing lights. That doesn't sound so bad. Additionally, they have developed a form of communication that consists primarily of making jokes about their own mortality and complaining about minor inconveniences. Jokes about mortality? Affirmative. Humans appear to find humor in situations that should cause existential terror. They regularly make light of topics such as death, taxes, and the inevitable heat death of the universe. Octavius felt a strange sensation in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. It was somewhere between admiration and absolute terror. They make jokes about the heat death of the universe. Confirmed. Additionally, they have created entire entertainment industries based on simulating dangerous situations for recreational purposes. They appear to enjoy being frightened. This is fascinating. Move closer for detailed observation. Negative. Maintaining safe distance as per protocol. Computer. That's a direct order. Direct orders must be cleared through safety protocols. Approaching Terra system requires authorization from 17 different departments. Then get authorization. Authorization. Requests submitted. Estimated processing time, 347 days. What? Bureaucratic efficiency is a priority. Safety is also a priority. When these priorities conflict, bureaucracy takes precedence. Octavius stared at the glowing planet below him, feeling a strange compulsion to ignore safety protocols and investigate further. This was highly unusual behavior for him. He had never ignored a protocol in his entire career. But something about the humans intrigued him. They seemed to accomplish impossible things through sheer determination and a complete disregard for logical limitations. Computer, he said slowly, what would happen if I were to accidentally drift closer to the planet? Accidental drift would be classified as pilot error. Pilot error requires immediate corrective action. And if the corrective action failed, secondary protocols would engage. Secondary protocols include emergency landing procedures. Emergency landing procedures? Affirmative. In the event of system failure, ship would automatically land on nearest suitable surface for repairs. Octavius looked at his control panel. It would be so easy to create a small system malfunction, just a minor navigation error, nothing serious, just enough to trigger the emergency protocols. Computer, he said, I'm going to run a diagnostic on the navigation system. Diagnostic initiated. I'm detecting an anomaly in the positioning sensors. Better run a full system check. Full system check initiated. Warning, minor malfunction detected in navigation array. Oh no, how unfortunate. I suppose we'll have to implement emergency procedures. Emergency procedures activated. Initiating controlled descent to nearest suitable landing site. What a terrible accident. I certainly hope this doesn't result in unplanned contact with the local inhabitants. Probability of contact with local inhabitants, 97.3%. How dreadful. I suppose I'll just have to make the best of this entirely unforeseeable situation. Landing sequence initiated. The landing was surprisingly smooth, considering that it was taking place on a planet inhabited by creatures that the galactic database classified as probability anomalies with aggressive tendencies. Octavius's ship touched down in what appeared to be a large, flat area covered in a black substance and marked with white lines. Several dozen human vehicles were arranged in neat rows nearby. "Computer," Octavius said, "where exactly have we landed?" "Location identified as shopping mall parking lot. Purpose: storage of human transportation devices during commercial activities." "And what are commercial activities?" "Humans gather in large structures to exchange small metal discs and colored pieces of paper for objects they do not need." "That sounds remarkably inefficient." "Efficiency does not appear to be a priority. Humans seem to derive pleasure from the process itself." Through the ship's viewports, Octavius could see several humans approaching. They were walking slowly, apparently unafraid of the strange vessel that had just landed in their midst. Several of them were holding small rectangular devices and pointing them at the ship. "Computer," Octavius said nervously, "are they preparing to attack?" "Negative. They appear to be documenting our arrival using primitive recording devices." "Should I be concerned?" "Unknown. Human motivations are difficult to predict. They may be planning to share documentation with their communications network." "What kind of communications network?" "Planetary information system that allows humans to share thoughts, images, and complaints about their daily experiences." "That sounds useful." Usage analysis indicates that 73% of content consists of pictures of food, 21% consists of arguments about topics they do not understand, and 6% consists of videos of small animals performing amusing actions. Oh, and what about the remaining percentage? That is devoted to humans attempting to become famous by performing increasingly ridiculous stunts. One of the humans had approached close enough to the ship that Octavius could see his face clearly. He was a middle-aged male with graying hair and what appeared to be a permanent expression of mild confusion. He was wearing a brightly colored shirt that featured an image of a cartoon character giving a thumbs-up gesture. The human tapped on the ship's hull with his knuckles, as if checking to see if it was solid. Then he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hello! Is anyone in there? My name is Gerald, and I'm from the Welcome Committee." "Computer," Octavius whispered. "Did he just say he's from a Welcome Committee?" "Affirmative. Humans appear to have organized themselves into groups designed to greet unexpected visitors." That's actually rather considerate. Unusual behavior for a species classified as dangerous." Gerald was now joined by several other humans, including a woman carrying what appeared to be a large container filled with brown liquid, and a man wearing a shirt that read, "World's Greatest Accountant." "Computer," Octavius said, "what is the brown liquid?" "Chemical analysis indicates it is a caffeinated beverage known as coffee. Humans consume it to maintain alertness and combat existential dread." Existential dread. Humans are apparently aware of their own mortality and find this knowledge somewhat distressing. They have developed various coping mechanisms, including caffeine consumption and making jokes. Gerald was now waving enthusiastically at the ship. "We brought coffee," he called out, "and donuts! Everybody loves donuts!" "Computer," Octavius said, "what are donuts?" Circular food items designed to provide temporary happiness through sugar consumption. That sounds actually quite pleasant. Humans have developed numerous methods for achieving temporary happiness. Most involve consuming substances that are technically harmful in large quantities. Octavius found himself strangely curious about these humans. They seemed genuinely friendly, despite the fact that an alien spacecraft had just landed in their parking lot. According to his training, he should maintain strict observation protocols and avoid any direct contact. But the humans seemed so welcoming. "Computer," he said, "what would happen if I were to accidentally activate the external communication system?" External communication would constitute direct contact with alien species. Direct contact requires authorization from 43 different departments. And if it were accidental contact would be classified as pilot error. Pilot error requires immediate damage control procedures. What kind of damage control procedures? Engaging with local population to minimize cultural contamination. So I would be required to talk to them. Affirmative. Communication would be mandatory. Octavius looked at the humans gathered around his ship. They seemed harmless enough. Gerald was now holding up a sign that read, "Welcome to Earth. Please enjoy your stay." The woman with the coffee was arranging what appeared to be small cakes on a portable table. The accountant was trying to calculate how many aliens his ship might hold. "Computer," Octavius said, "I believe I may have accidentally activated the communication system. Communication system activated, beginning damage control procedures." "How unfortunate. I suppose I'll have to make the best of this entirely unforeseeable situation." External speakers online. You are now able to communicate with local population. Octavius cleared his throat nervously. "Hello," he called out through the ship's speakers. "I am, greetings from, that is to say, hello." Gerald's face lit up with excitement. "Hello there. Welcome to Earth. We're so glad you could make it. Can you come out and join us? We've got coffee." I'm not sure that would be appropriate," Octavius replied. "I'm supposed to maintain observation protocols." "Observation protocols?" Gerald looked confused. "Are you here to observe us?" "Well, yes. I'm supposed to study your behavior patterns and report back to my superiors." "Oh, how interesting. We'd love to help. What would you like to know?" Octavius consulted his tablet. "According to my mission parameters, I need to assess your technological development level, social organization, and potential threat status." "Threat status?" The accountant stepped forward. "We're not threatening. We're just people. I do tax returns." "Tax returns?" "Yeah, helping people figure out how much money they owe the government. It's actually quite rewarding work, despite what everyone says." You voluntarily give money to your government?" "Well, not voluntarily exactly," Gerald chimed in. "But we do it anyway. It's like a civic duty. Plus, they arrest you if you don't. Your government arrests people for not giving them money." "Oh, not just for that," the woman with the coffee added cheerfully. "They arrest people for all sorts of things. Speeding, littering, singing karaoke after midnight on weekdays." "Your government considers singing to be a crime?" "Only if you're really bad at it," Gerald explained, "or if you're disturbing the peace, or if you're drunk, or if you're singing copyrighted songs without permission." "This is fascinating," Octavius said, making notes on his tablet. "Your society is simultaneously oppressive and permissive." "Pretty much," Gerald beamed. "Would you like to come out and meet everyone properly? We promise we won't arrest you or anything." I suppose a brief cultural exchange wouldn't violate too many protocols," Octavius said, though he was already mentally calculating how many regulations he was about to break. The ship's airlock hissed open, and Octavius stepped out onto the strange black surface of the parking lot. The humans gathered around him with expressions of curiosity and excitement, rather than the fear and hostility he had been trained to expect. "Wow!" Gerald exclaimed. "You look exactly like a really tall chicken wearing a business suit. That's amazing!" I am a Thraxian, Octavius replied stiffly. We are a proud species with a rich cultural heritage spanning over— Do you lay eggs? The accountant interrupted. What? Eggs? Do you lay eggs? Because you look like a chicken and chickens lay eggs, and I was just wondering if that's how your species reproduces. Octavius felt his face feathers ruffling with embarrassment. That is a highly personal question. Oh, sorry. The accountant looked sheepish. I didn't mean to be rude. I'm just naturally curious about biological processes. It's the accountant in me. I like to categorize things. You categorize reproduction? Well, not professionally. That would be weird. I mostly categorize tax-deductible expenses, but I have hobbies. The woman with the coffee stepped forward. I'm Martha, she said, extending her hand in what Octavius recognized as a human greeting gesture. I run the coffee shop down the street. Would you like to try some coffee? It's our specialty. Octavius looked at the dark liquid suspiciously. Is it safe for non-human consumption? Probably, Martha replied cheerfully. I mean, it's barely safe for human consumption, but we drink it anyway. That's not particularly reassuring. Oh, don't worry. The worst that can happen is you'll get jittery and start talking really fast about things that don't matter. It's actually quite fun. I already talk about things that don't matter, Octavius admitted. It's my job. Perfect. Then you'll fit right in. Gerald had been studying Octavius intently throughout this exchange. You know, he said. You mentioned that you're here to assess our threat level. What exactly makes a species threatening? Octavius consulted his tablet. According to galactic standards, a species is considered threatening if they possess advanced weaponry, aggressive territorial expansion tendencies, or the ability to disrupt established cosmic order. And we're threatening because— Well, Octavius scrolled through his data. You don't appear to possess advanced weaponry beyond your current technological level. Your territorial expansion is limited to your own planet, and you haven't disrupted any cosmic order that I can detect. Indeed, so why are we classified as dangerous? I'm not entirely sure, Octavius admitted. The classification was made by the Department of Xenological Assessment, but their reasoning is marked as classified in my files. That's odd, the accountant mused. In my experience, when something is classified without explanation, it usually means someone made a mistake and is too embarrassed to admit it. You think the galactic government made a mistake? Well, governments make mistakes all the time. Last year, our local government spent $3 million on a statue of a fish that nobody asked for. A statue of a fish? Apparently it was supposed to represent the eternal struggle between man and nature, but it just looks like a really big fish with a confused expression. Your government wastes money on symbolic fish? Oh, that's nothing, Martha laughed. Last month they voted to rename the main street Prosperity Avenue because they thought it would attract more businesses. It used to be called Main Street, which actually made sense because it was the main street. And did it attract more businesses? Nope. But now nobody can find anything because all the GPS systems still say Main Street. Octavius was frantically taking notes. This is remarkable. Your species appears to survive despite your government's apparent inability to make logical decisions. Pretty much, Gerald agreed. Oh, we've gotten really good at working around bureaucratic incompetence. How? We ignore most of what they tell us and just figure things out ourselves. Like, they told us that the fish statue would boost tourism, but instead we just started telling jokes about it, and now people come to see the stupidest statue in the state. It actually worked. You achieved the desired outcome through mockery. Exactly. Humans are excellent at turning disasters into opportunities through the strategic application of sarcasm. Octavius felt that strange sensation in his chest again. These humans were demonstrating exactly the kind of impossible problem-solving that had made them legendary throughout the galaxy. They had taken their government's incompetence and somehow transformed it into a tourist attraction. "Computer," he called out to his ship, "are you recording this conversation?" Affirmative. Also detecting unusual biometric readings from your location. What kind of unusual readings? Your stress levels have decreased by 67% since beginning interaction with humans. Additionally, your brain is producing elevated levels of chemicals associated with amusement and social bonding. Is that bad? Unknown. This is the first recorded instance of a galactic citizen experiencing positive emotions while on official duty. Martha had been listening to this exchange with growing amusement. "You know," she said, "it sounds like your job is pretty stressful." "It is extremely stressful," Octavius confirmed. "I spend most of my time following protocols designed by people who have never actually done the job they're creating protocols for." "Oh, we know all about that," Gerald laughed. "I work for the Department of Motor Vehicles. Half my job involves explaining to people why they need 17 different documents to prove they are who they already proved they were with the first 16 documents. And the other half?" Apologizing for the first half, the accountant nodded sympathetically. "I spend most of tax season explaining to people why the government needs to know how much money they spent on business lunches, but not how much they spent on business breakfasts." "That makes no sense." "Exactly!" all three humans exclaimed simultaneously. "But you continue to do these jobs anyway." "Well, someone has to do them," Martha said. "And between you and me, there's something oddly satisfying about helping people navigate absurd bureaucratic systems." "You find satisfaction in bureaucracy?" "Not in the bureaucracy itself," Gerald explained, "but in helping people deal with it. Like when someone comes in completely confused about which form they need, and I can actually help them figure it out. That feels pretty good. Even though the system is illogical? Especially because the system is illogical," the accountant added. "Anyone can work with a logical system. It takes real skill to make an illogical system actually function." Octavia stared at them in amazement. "You're proud of your ability to work within dysfunctional systems?" "Absolutely," Gerald grinned. "Humans are the galaxy's leading experts at making the best of bad situations." But that's exactly what makes you dangerous," Octavius realized. "You don't accept limitations. You don't follow logical protocols. You just improvise solutions. Is that bad? It's terrifying. The entire galactic government is based on the principle that complex problems require complex bureaucratic solutions. If everyone started just figuring things out for themselves, the whole system would collapse." Martha patted his arm gently. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing." "Not a bad thing?" Octavius squawked. "Without proper bureaucratic oversight, there would be chaos, anarchy. People would be making decisions without filling out the appropriate forms." And Octavius paused, trying to think of why this would be catastrophic. Well, it would be very irregular." "Irregular can be good," Gerald said. "Like this whole conversation is irregular. You're supposed to be observing us from a distance, but instead you're having coffee with us in a parking lot, and it's working out pretty well." "Actually," Octavius admitted, "this is the most useful intelligence I've gathered in my entire career. See, sometimes the irregular approach works better." "Computer," Octavius called out, "are you still monitoring this situation?" "Affirmative. Also receiving incoming communications from headquarters." "What kind of communications?" "Director Snodgrass is requesting a status update on your mission. Tell her everything is proceeding according to protocol." "That would be inaccurate. You are currently engaging in unauthorized cultural exchange while consuming potentially hazardous alien beverages. It's coffee, not alien beverages. From the perspective of galactic headquarters, all human substances are alien substances." Gerald looked concerned. "Are you going to get in trouble for talking to us?" "Probably," Octavius sighed, "but at this point, I'm more interested in understanding why humans are considered dangerous than I am in following proper protocols." "Well, what have you learned so far?" Octavius consulted his notes. You appear to be a species that thrives on chaos, finds humor in adversity, and routinely achieves impossible results through methods that defy logical analysis. You've created governmental systems that shouldn't work, but somehow do. You've developed technologies that violate basic safety principles, but continue to use them anyway. And you seem to genuinely enjoy helping each other, even when there's no obvious benefit to yourselves. That sounds about right, Martha agreed. Anything else? You make really good coffee. Oh, thank you. Computer, Octavius called out. How should I classify this species in my report? Insufficient data. Humans appear to exist in a state of controlled chaos that should not be sustainable, yet somehow is. So what's my official recommendation? Unknown. Standard threat assessment protocols do not account for species that are simultaneously harmless and completely unpredictable. Gerald had been listening to this exchange with growing amusement. You know, he said, it sounds like your whole galactic government is basically one giant bureaucracy. It is, Octavius confirmed. The most efficient bureaucracy in the known universe. And how's that working out for you? Well, Octavius thought about his centuries of filing reports that nobody read, attending meetings that accomplished nothing, and following protocols designed by committees who had never actually encountered the situations they were creating protocols for. Actually, not very well. Maybe you need a more human approach. What would a human approach look like? Well, the accountant said, first we'd acknowledge that the system is broken. But admitting the system is broken would undermine confidence in governmental authority. Good, Martha laughed. Overconfident governments are dangerous. A little healthy skepticism keeps them honest. But without confidence in authority, how do you maintain social order? We don't, Gerald grinned. We maintain social cooperation instead. What's the difference? Order is imposed from above. Cooperation comes from people choosing to work together because it makes sense. But what if people make bad choices? Then they learn from their mistakes and make better choices next time. And if they don't learn, then everyone else learns not to trust their judgment. Octavius was beginning to understand why humans were considered dangerous. They had created a social system based on voluntary cooperation rather than mandatory compliance. It was messy, unpredictable, and completely outside the bounds of established galactic governance models. Computer, he called out. I think I understand why humans are classified as dangerous. Please explain. They've proven that complex societies can function without complex bureaucracies. If this information spreads throughout the galaxy, every species will start questioning the necessity of their governmental systems. And the entire galactic power structure is based on the premise that complex problems require complex bureaucratic solutions. If people start believing they can solve problems themselves, the galactic government would become obsolete. Exactly. Gerald looked confused. But wouldn't that be a good thing? I mean, if people can solve their own problems, why do they need a giant bureaucracy telling them how to do it? Because, Octavius paused, trying to think of a good reason. Because that's how it's always been done. That's not really a reason, though, is it? It's the only reason I've ever been given. Martha patted his arm again. Maybe it's time to start asking for better reasons. But questioning established authority is against regulations. Whose regulations? The people in authority. So the people in power made rules that prevent people from questioning their power? Well, yes. And that doesn't seem suspicious to you? Octavius felt his worldview beginning to crack like an egg that had been dropped from a significant height. Everything he had been taught about the necessity of bureaucratic order was being challenged by 3 humans in a shopping mall parking lot, and he was beginning to suspect that they might be right. Computer, he called out desperately. Contact Director Snodgrass immediately. I need guidance. Contacting Director Snodgrass. Connection established. Director Snodgrass's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Agent Blunderbuss, what's your status report? Director, Octavius said carefully. "I've made contact with the human population." "Made contact? That's completely against protocol. Are you injured? Traumatized? Have they attempted to assimilate you into their culture?" "Well, they offered me coffee." "Oh no! Coffee is a known human mind control substance. Don't drink it under any circumstances." "Too late," Octavius admitted. "And Director, it's actually quite good." Then there was a long pause. "Agent Blunderbuss," Director Snodgrass said slowly, "I'm going to need you to return to headquarters immediately for psychological evaluation." "But Director, I'm learning valuable intelligence about human society." "What kind of intelligence?" "They've developed a governmental system based on voluntary cooperation rather than mandatory compliance." Another pause. "That's impossible. Complex societies require complex bureaucratic oversight." "That's what I thought too, but these humans have proven otherwise." "Agent Blunderbuss, you are clearly suffering from acute exposure to human irrationality. Return to headquarters immediately." Gerald had been listening to this conversation with increasing concern. "Hey," he said to Octavius, "it sounds like your boss is kind of a jerk." "She's not a jerk," Octavius protested. "She's just very committed to proper procedures." "Same thing," Martha observed. "Agent Blunderbuss." Director Snodgrass's voice was becoming shrill. "Who are you talking to?" "Some humans, Director. They're actually quite helpful." "Helpful? Humans aren't helpful. They're dangerous anarchists who threaten the very foundation of civilized society." "Actually," Gerald called out toward the ship, "we're mostly just people trying to get by without causing too much trouble." "Who said that?" "That was Gerald. He works for the Department of Motor Vehicles." "A bureaucrat? You're talking to a human bureaucrat?" "Yes, Director, and he's explained how they make dysfunctional systems work through creative problem-solving." "That's impossible. Dysfunctional systems require additional bureaucratic oversight to function properly." "Apparently not." Octavius was getting excited now. "They just ignore the dysfunctional parts and focus on helping people." "Ignore the dysfunctional parts? That's completely against everything we stand for." "Maybe what we stand for is the problem." The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Octavius could hear the distant sound of shopping mall music drifting across the parking lot. "Agent Blunderbuss," Director Snodgrass said finally, her voice dropping to a whisper, "did you just suggest that our entire governmental philosophy might be flawed?" "Well, yes. I'm sending backup immediately. Do not move. Do not talk to any more humans. And for the love of all that is bureaucratically sacred, do not drink any more coffee." The communication cut off, leaving Octavius standing in the parking lot with three humans who were looking at him with expressions of sympathy and mild amusement. "Backup?" Martha asked. "That doesn't sound good." "No," Octavius agreed. "Director Snodgrass will probably send a full diplomatic team to retrieve me and implement proper first contact protocols." "What do proper first contact protocols involve?" Gerald asked. "Approximately 47 hours of paperwork, followed by a ceremonial exchange of gifts that have been pre-approved by 17 different committees, followed by formal negotiations conducted according to the Galactic Treaty on Interspecies Contact, which is 3,147 pages long and includes subsections on proper greeting postures, acceptable topics of conversation, and approved methods for expressing polite disagreement." "That sounds awful," the accountant said. "It is awful, but it's proper." "Maybe proper isn't always better," Martha suggested gently. "But if we don't follow proper procedures, how do we know we're doing things correctly? We use common sense and try to be decent to each other." "Common sense isn't reliable. It varies from person to person." "So does bureaucracy. The only difference is that bureaucracy pretends to be objective, while common sense admits it's subjective." Octavius felt his mind reeling. These humans kept making points that seemed reasonable, but completely contradicted everything he had been taught about the importance of standardized procedures. "Computer," he called out, "how long until Director Snodgrass's backup team arrives?" "Estimated arrival time, 6 hours, 23 minutes. "What kind of backup team?" "Full diplomatic contact squad, including protocol specialists, cultural contamination experts, and emergency bureaucracy deployment unit." "Emergency bureaucracy deployment unit?" "Specialized team trained to establish proper administrative procedures in chaotic situations." Gerald looked alarmed. "They're going to bureaucratize us." "It's for your own good," Octavius protested, though he was beginning to doubt this himself. "Without proper administrative structure, your society will descend into chaos." "Our society is already chaos," Martha laughed. "We've just learned to live with it. But chaos is inefficient, sometimes, but it's also flexible. When something doesn't work, we try something else. We don't spend centuries following procedures that stopped making sense decades ago." "But how do you maintain consistency?" "We don't, we adapt." "That's terrifying. It's liberating." The accountant had been thinking during this exchange. "You know," he said, "maybe there's a middle ground here." "What do you mean?" "Well, some bureaucracy is probably necessary. Like, we need systems for keeping track of things and making sure important stuff doesn't get forgotten. But maybe we don't need quite so much bureaucracy." "Heresy!" Octavius gasped. "Suggesting that there might be too much bureaucracy is like suggesting that there might be too much order." "Can there be too much order?" "Of course not. Order is always good." "Always?" Gerald raised an eyebrow. "What about when the order is stupid?" "Order cannot be stupid. Order is objective." "Says who?" "The people who created the order." "And what if they were wrong?" "They couldn't be wrong. They were experts." "Experts can be wrong too." But if experts can be wrong, and order can be stupid, and bureaucracy can be excessive—" Octavius's voice trailed off as the implications of this line of thinking began to sink in. "Then everything I've been taught might be wrong," Martha suggested gently. "Not necessarily wrong," Gerald said diplomatically. "Maybe just incomplete." "Incomplete how?" "Well, bureaucracy and procedures can be useful tools for organizing complex activities. But they're just tools. They're not ends in themselves." "I don't understand." "A hammer is a useful tool for driving nails. But if you use a hammer for every job, you're going to break a lot of things that didn't need hammering. So bureaucracy is like a hammer." "Exactly. Sometimes you need it. Sometimes you don't. The trick is knowing when to use it and when to put it away." Octavius sat down heavily on a nearby parking lot curb, his mind struggling to process this revelation. "You're saying that the entire galactic government might be using hammers to perform surgery?" "Something like that," the accountant agreed. "Just because something works in one situation doesn't mean it works in every situation. But how do you know which situations require which tools? Experience, trial and error, common sense, asking people who actually do the work instead of people who just make rules about the work." "Computer," Octavius called out weakly, "are you recording all of this?" "Affirmative. Also detecting significant changes in your brain chemistry." "What kind of changes?" "Patterns consistent with what humans call enlightenment, or having your mind blown." "Is that dangerous?" "Unknown, but it appears to be irreversible." Martha sat down next to Octavius on the curb. "You know," she said, "change can be scary, but it can also be exciting. Think about all the possibilities." "What possibilities?" "Well, what if your galactic government tried some human-style approaches to problem-solving? What if they asked the people who actually do the work how to make things better? What if they were willing to admit when something wasn't working and try something else? That would be—" Octavius paused, trying to imagine a galactic government that actually solved problems instead of just managing them. "That would be completely revolutionary." "Revolutions can be good," Gerald said. "We've had a few ourselves. Usually works out pretty well eventually." But what about stability, predictability, order? What about progress, innovation, actually getting things done? Before Octavius could respond to this, his ship's communication system crackled to life again. Agent Blunderbuss, Director Snodgrass's voice was even more agitated than before. I've been reviewing your mission recordings, and I'm deeply concerned about the content of your conversations with the humans. Director, Octavius said carefully, I think we may need to reconsider our assessment of human society. Absolutely not. You are clearly suffering from severe cultural contamination. The backup team has been instructed to implement immediate quarantine procedures upon arrival. Quarantine procedures? You will be isolated from human contact and subjected to intensive bureaucratic rehabilitation until you remember the importance of proper procedures. Gerald looked horrified. They're going to brainwash you? It's not brainwashing, Octavius protested, though his voice lacked conviction. It's therapeutic reminder of proper protocol adherence. That's brainwashing with extra steps. Agent Blunderbuss, Director Snodgrass continued, you are hereby ordered to cease all communication with human subjects and return to your vessel immediately. But Director, I haven't finished my assessment. Your assessment is complete. Humans are dangerous because they promote anarchistic thinking patterns that threaten bureaucratic stability. This conversation alone has proven that they are capable of undermining properly trained personnel in a matter of hours. Maybe that's because their ideas make sense. Sense is irrelevant. Procedure is paramount. The three humans exchanged glances. It was clear that this conversation was not going well for their new alien friend. Hey, Martha said quietly to Octavius, you don't have to go back with them if you don't want to. What do you mean? Well, you could stay here. We'd be happy to have you. Gerald knows someone at the immigration office who could probably help you with the paperwork. You'd do that for me? Of course. You seem like a nice person, being individual, and you make good conversation. But I don't know anything about living on Earth. Nobody does when they start. Gerald laughed. That's half the fun. We're all just making it up as we go along. That sounds terrifying. It is a little, but it's also exciting, and we help each other out. That's what communities do. Agent Blunderbuss, Director Snodgrass's voice was reaching new levels of shrillness. Do you copy? You are ordered to return to your vessel immediately. Octavius looked at his ship, then at the three humans who had spent the afternoon showing him kindness and sharing their coffee and their completely revolutionary ideas about governance and social cooperation. Computer, he called out, what would happen if I were to accidentally miss my rendezvous with the backup team? Missing a scheduled rendezvous would be classified as dereliction of duty. And the consequences? Court-martial followed by assignment to the Department of Galactic Waste Management. That doesn't sound so bad. The Department of Galactic Waste Management is responsible for cataloging cosmic debris. The average employee spends 847 years filling out forms describing the precise location and composition of individual pieces of space dust. On second thought, that sounds awful. However, the computer continued, there is another option, which is you could officially request political asylum. Political asylum. Affirmative. According to galactic law, any citizen has the right to request asylum in cases where returning to their home government would result in persecution for their political beliefs. And what are my political beliefs? Based on today's conversations, you appear to believe that governments should actually help people instead of just creating more paperwork. That's a political belief? It is now. Gerald looked excited. So you could actually stay? Theoretically, but it would mean giving up my career, my pension, and my official parking space at headquarters. What would you do instead? I don't know. I've never thought about doing anything else. Martha smiled. What do you want to do? I want to understand how things work. I want to help solve problems. I want to do work that actually matters. Those sound like great goals. I bet we could find you something. Really? Sure. You're good at analyzing complex systems and you're detail-oriented. Those are valuable skills. But I don't know anything about human society. So, you'll learn. That's what life is about. Learning new things and figuring out how to use them. Agent Blunderbuss. Director. Snodgrass's voice was now so shrill that it was causing nearby car alarms to go off. This is your final warning. Return to your vessel immediately or face the consequences. Octavius stood up slowly, looking back and forth between his ship and the three humans who had shown him more genuine friendship in one afternoon than he had experienced in centuries of bureaucratic employment. "Computer," he said finally, "please relay the following message to Director Snodgrass. Ready to transmit. Director, I formally request political asylum on the planet Earth, based on my belief that governments should serve their citizens rather than the other way around." Message transmitted. The silence that followed was so profound that Octavius could hear his own heartbeat, which was considerably faster than usual. "Agent Blunderbuss." Director Snodgrass's voice was now barely a whisper. "Did you just commit treason?" "I don't think it's treason to believe that people matter more than paperwork. It's the very definition of treason." "Then I guess I'm a traitor. You'll never work in galactic government again." "Good!" Gerald started applauding, followed by Martha and the accountant. Soon, other humans who had been watching from a distance joined in, creating a small but enthusiastic ovation for intergalactic political defection. "Welcome to Earth," Martha said, giving Octavius what he would later learn was called a hug. "You're going to love it here. How can you be so sure? Because Earth is the perfect place for people who want to make a difference instead of just following orders. Plus," Gerald added, "we have really good coffee." "And donuts," the accountant reminded them. "And," Martha said with a grin, "we have a long and proud tradition of welcoming political refugees who believe in crazy ideas like democracy and individual freedom." "Those ideas aren't crazy." "Exactly. That's why you'll fit right in." 6 hours later, the backup team arrived to find Octavius's ship sitting empty in the parking lot, with a note taped to the airlock that read, "Gone fishing. Will return when galactic government learns to prioritize people over paperwork. P.S. Try the coffee. It's actually quite good." Agent O. Blunderbuss, retired. The backup team spent the next 72 hours filling out forms to report this unprecedented situation. Their report was 847 pages long and included detailed appendices on proper procedures for handling improper procedures and protocol violations in non-protocol situations. The report was filed with the Department of Unprecedented Situations, where it joined approximately 7 million other reports describing problems that nobody quite knew how to solve using existing procedures. Meanwhile, Octavius was discovering that humans had created entire industries dedicated to helping people navigate bureaucratic confusion. He found work at a local tax preparation office where his encyclopedic knowledge of complex regulations made him invaluable for helping people deal with governmental agencies that seemed designed to confuse rather than assist. "You know," Gerald said one day over coffee, "it's funny how things work out." "How so?" "Well, your government sent you here to figure out why we're dangerous, and instead you figured out why your government is dysfunctional. And now I'm helping people deal with our dysfunctional government. See, sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places." Octavius had to agree. In the 6 months since his defection, he had helped over 200 humans successfully navigate various bureaucratic challenges. He had also written a best-selling book titled The Galactic Guide to Getting Things Done Despite Your Government, which had become required reading in several political science programs. More importantly, he had discovered something that had been completely absent from his previous existence: job satisfaction. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said to Martha one morning as she prepared his usual coffee. "What's that?" I'm doing essentially the same work I was doing before, dealing with complex bureaucratic systems, but now it actually helps people instead of just creating more paperwork. That's the difference between working for the system and working for the people. I can't believe it took me 400 years to figure that out. Better late than never. 3 months later, Octavius received an unexpected communication from Director Snodgrass. "Agent Blunderbuss," her voice crackled through his apartment's communication system, "I have a proposition for you." "I'm not coming back, Director. I like it here." "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking for your help." "My help?" "The Galactic Council has been receiving reports from other observation missions. It seems that several other agents have been influenced by human approaches to problem solving. Good for them. It's causing a crisis. Agents are questioning established procedures. Some are even suggesting that we try human-style solutions to long-standing galactic problems. Well, some of their suggestions are actually working. I'm shocked. Agent Kowalski from the Epsilon sector implemented something called customer service in the Department of Interplanetary Transportation. Processing times for travel permits dropped from 6 months to 3 days. Imagine that. Agent Rodriguez introduced common-sense evaluations to the Bureau of Cosmic Safety. They've reduced workplace accidents by 73% just by asking people who actually do the work what the real safety hazards are. What a concept! The entire galactic government is in chaos. People are expecting actual results instead of just proper procedures. How terrible for you. "Octavius," Director Snodgrass's voice dropped to a pleading tone, "we need your help. You understand both systems. Could you possibly consult with us on implementing some of these human approaches?" Octavius smiled, sipping his morning coffee while watching the sunrise through his apartment window. "Let me think about it, Director. We could offer you a very generous consulting fee. I'm not interested in money. What are you interested in? Results. If the Galactic Council is genuinely willing to prioritize helping people over following procedures, then maybe we can talk. But how do we know if our procedures are helping people? You ask the people. Revolutionary concept, I know." 6 months later, Octavius found himself standing in the Galactic Council chambers, addressing the assembled representatives of 347 different star systems. The chamber was a magnificent example of bureaucratic architecture, vast, imposing, and designed to make individuals feel small and insignificant. "Distinguished representatives," Octavius began, consulting notes written on what appeared to be a coffee-stained napkin, "I'm here to discuss the human approach to governance, which can be summarized in 3 simple principles. Ask the people who do the work how to make it better. When something doesn't work, try something else. And remember that the purpose of government is to help people, not to create more government." Councillor Zephyr 9 from the Rigelian Collective raised a tentacle. "But how do we maintain order without proper procedural oversight?" "You maintain cooperation through mutual benefit instead of order through mandatory compliance." "That's impossible. Without rigid hierarchical structures, society would collapse into anarchy." "Really?" Octavius pulled out his tablet, which now contained 6 months of data on human governmental efficiency. Earth has 195 different governmental systems, most of which operate on democratic principles rather than hierarchical bureaucracy. Their average response time to citizen requests is 3.7 days. Our average response time is 847 days. No, but their systems are chaotic. Their systems are flexible. When something doesn't work, they change it. When we encounter a problem that doesn't fit our procedures, we create 17 committees to study the possibility of forming a subcommittee to review the potential need for new procedures. Councillor Blurp 23 from the Andromedan Trade Federation looked skeptical. "You're suggesting we abandon millions of years of bureaucratic evolution in favor of, what, asking people what they want? I'm suggesting we try it as an experiment. That's another human concept. When you're not sure if something will work, you test it on a small scale before implementing it everywhere. Experiments are inefficient. We should know the outcome before we begin. But you can't know the outcome until you try. That's why they're called experiments instead of confirmations. Director Snodgrass, who had been sitting quietly throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Octavius makes a valid point. Perhaps we could implement a limited trial program. What kind of trial program? Demanded Councillor Fizzbottom from the Centaurian Defence League. Well, Octavius said, pulling out another coffee-stained napkin, humans have this thing called pilot programs. You pick one small problem, try a human-style solution, and see what happens. If it works, you expand it. If it doesn't, you try something else. And if the pilot program fails, then you've learned something. Humans call that valuable experience instead of catastrophic failure. The council chamber erupted in confused murmuring. The concept of learning from failure was so foreign to galactic governmental philosophy that several translators malfunctioned trying to process it. "Order, order!" shouted the council speaker, banging his ceremonial gavel with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting his entire career for an opportunity to use it. "Agent Blunderbuss, are you seriously suggesting that failure could be educational? I'm suggesting that failure is inevitable, so we might as well learn from it instead of pretending it never happened. But admitting failure would undermine confidence in governmental competency. No. It would demonstrate governmental honesty. Humans trust their leaders more when they admit mistakes and try to fix them. That's completely backwards. Is it? How much do you trust leaders who claim they never make mistakes? This question was followed by an even longer period of confused murmuring, as most of the assembled representatives realized they had never actually considered this possibility. Councillor Snodgrass consulted her ever-present clipboard. What exactly would this pilot program involve? We pick the most obviously broken system in the galactic government and try fixing it using human approaches. Which system would that be? Well, Octavius said, grinning, I was thinking we could start with the Department of Appropriate Paperwork Distribution. The council chamber fell silent. The Department of Appropriate Paperwork Distribution was legendary throughout the galaxy for its complete inability to distribute appropriate paperwork. Citizens routinely received forms for species they weren't, planets they'd never visited, and services that didn't exist. The department's response to complaints was to send additional forms explaining why the original forms were appropriate, regardless of evidence to the contrary. The DEPD? Councillor Zephyr 9 sounded horrified. But that department is completely useless. Essential to maintaining proper documentation protocols. Essential for what? They haven't successfully distributed a correctly matched form in over 3 centuries. But they follow proper procedures. Their procedures don't work. That's not the point. The point is that they follow them consistently. Octavius felt that familiar sensation of his worldview being stretched beyond its breaking point. You're saying that following useless procedures consistently is better than achieving useful results inconsistently. Of course, consistency is the foundation of good governance. Even if you're consistently failing, consistent failure is better than inconsistent success because it's predictable. But Octavius realized he was witnessing the fundamental philosophical difference between human and galactic approaches to governance. But wouldn't you rather have inconsistent success than consistent failure? Absolutely not. How would we plan for inconsistent results? You'd adapt. You'd be flexible. You'd try different approaches until you found ones that worked. That sounds exhausting. It is exhausting, but it's also effective. Director Snodgrass had been taking notes throughout this exchange. Octavius, she said finally, what exactly would a human-style approach to the DAPD look like? First, we'd ask the people who actually receive the paperwork what problems they're having. Then we'd ask the people who work at the DAPD what makes their job difficult. Then we'd brainstorm solutions that address both sets of problems. And then we'd try the most promising solution and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we'd try something else. How many times would we try? Until we find something that works. But what if nothing works? Then we'd ask more people for more ideas. Humans have this saying, 2 heads are better than 1. It means that more people thinking about a problem usually leads to better solutions. But more people means more opinions. More opinions means more disagreement. More disagreement means more complications. More opinions also means more possible solutions. And humans have developed techniques for handling disagreement constructively, such as voting, compromise, taking turns. Sometimes they even flip coins. Flip coins? Councillor Fizzbottom looked apoplectic. You want us to make governmental decisions by flipping coins? Only when all the alternatives are equally good or equally bad. It's better than spending 6 months in committee meetings that don't actually decide anything. But coins are random. Government should be rational. Government should be effective. If rational methods don't work, maybe it's time to try irrational methods. The council chamber was now in complete uproar. Half the representatives were shouting about the importance of maintaining rational procedures, while the other half were shouting about the necessity of achieving practical results. Several smaller arguments had broken out about the proper definition of effectiveness versus efficiency versus propriety. Order! The council speaker was now banging his gavel with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new hobby. Order! We will recess for 15 minutes to allow everyone to consult their procedural manuals. During the recess, Octavius found himself surrounded by a small group of younger representatives who seemed genuinely curious about human approaches to governance. Agent Blunderbuss, said Councillor Martinez 7 from the Beta Centauri Educational Cooperative, these human techniques you've described, have you actually seen them work? I've been living on Earth for 8 months now, and I've seen humans solve problems that would take our government decades to even acknowledge, let alone address, such as, last month the city where I live had a problem with traffic congestion on Main Street. The traditional approach would have been to form a traffic study committee, conduct an 18-month analysis, recommend the formation of a traffic solutions subcommittee, and eventually implement a solution that addressed conditions from 3 years ago. And what did the humans do? They asked the people who drive on Main Street every day what they thought would help. Someone suggested changing the timing of the traffic lights. Someone else suggested adding a turn lane. They tried both ideas, and traffic improved within a week. A week? 1 week, from problem identification to solution implementation. But how did they know the solutions would work before they tried them? They didn't. That's the point. Instead of spending months trying to predict the future, they spent 1 week testing possible solutions. And if the solutions hadn't worked, they would have tried different solutions. Humans call it trial and error instead of preliminary analysis, followed by comprehensive review, followed by careful implementation of thoroughly tested procedures. Councillor Singh 12 from the Gamma Draconis Research Collective looked thoughtful. This approach seems to require a tolerance for uncertainty that our current system is designed to eliminate. Exactly. But here's the thing. The uncertainty exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Our current system pretends that we can eliminate uncertainty through extensive planning, but all we really do is spend more time planning than implementing. And humans are comfortable with uncertainty. They're not comfortable with it, but they've learned to work with it instead of pretending it doesn't exist. How? They make small decisions quickly instead of big decisions slowly. If a small decision turns out to be wrong, they can change it easily. If a big decision turns out to be wrong, it's much harder to fix. The 15-minute recess stretched to 45 minutes as more representatives joined the discussion. When the council speaker finally called everyone back to order, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed noticeably. The Council recognizes that Agent Blunderbuss has presented some intriguing concepts, the Speaker announced. However, implementing any of these suggestions would require extensive review by the Committee on Procedural Innovation. How extensive? Octavius asked. The Committee on Procedural Innovation meets once every 18 months to review proposals for procedural modifications. Their next meeting is scheduled for approximately 7 years from now. 7 years! That's actually quite efficient. The Committee on Procedural Innovation used to meet once every 24 months. But the problem we're trying to solve could be fixed in a few weeks. Agent Blunderbuss, Director Snodgrass said gently. You're thinking like a human again. We don't fix problems in weeks. We address them through proper channels over appropriate timeframes. But why? Why is taking 7 years to fix a problem that could be fixed in 7 weeks considered better? Because 7 years allows time for thorough consideration of all possible consequences. And what if the consequences of waiting 7 years are worse than the consequences of making a mistake in 7 weeks? This question was met with the kind of silence usually reserved for moments when someone has just pointed out that the Emperor is not, in fact, wearing any clothes. Agent Blunderbuss, Councillor Zephyr 9 said slowly, are you suggesting that sometimes the cure might be worse than the disease? I'm suggesting that sometimes doing nothing is worse than doing something imperfect. But imperfect solutions create unpredictable outcomes, and perfect solutions that take 7 years to implement create perfectly predictable outcomes. By the time you finish, the original problem has gotten worse and created 17 new problems. That's actually a valid point, admitted Councillor Martinez 7. No, it's not, protested Councillor Fizzbottom. Imperfect solutions are dangerous because they set precedents for accepting suboptimal results. And perfect solutions that never get implemented set precedents for accepting completely non-existent results. But at least we maintain our standards. Standards for what? For taking 7 years to accomplish what could be done in 7 weeks? Standards for thoroughness, for careful consideration, for proper procedure. Standards for being completely irrelevant by the time you finish. At this point, even Director Snodgrass was beginning to look uncomfortable. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could consider a compromise approach. What kind of compromise? Well, what if we implemented a human-style pilot program but subjected it to proper oversight by the Committee on Experimental Procedure Evaluation? How much oversight? Standard oversight. The Committee on Experimental Procedure Evaluation would monitor the pilot program and submit regular reports to the Department of Pilot Program Assessment, which would coordinate with the Bureau of Experimental Results Analysis to ensure proper documentation of all outcomes and side effects. And how long would this oversight process take? Approximately 14 years. To oversee a pilot program that would take 14 weeks. Proper oversight is essential for ensuring accurate evaluation of experimental results. Octavius sat down heavily in his chair, feeling the weight of thousands of years of bureaucratic momentum pressing down on him like a cosmic paperweight. Director, he said finally, do you see the problem here? What problem? You want to implement a fast solution slowly. You're using a slow system to evaluate a fast system. It's like using a bicycle to test the effectiveness of rocket ships. That's a very creative metaphor, but I'm not sure what your point is. My point is that you can't evaluate the effectiveness of human-style approaches using galactic-style bureaucratic procedures. They're based on completely different philosophies. Then how do we evaluate them? The same way humans do. You try them, see if they work, and adjust accordingly. But how do we know if they're working if we don't have proper evaluation procedures? You ask the people who are affected by the results. But what if the people who are affected don't understand the complexities of governmental evaluation methodologies? Then maybe the evaluation methodologies are too complex. Evaluation methodologies can't be too complex. Complex problems require complex evaluation systems. Says who? The Committee on Evaluation Methodology Standards. And who appointed the Committee on Evaluation Methodology Standards? The Department of Committee Appointments. And who oversees the Department of Committee Appointments? The Bureau of Departmental Oversight. And who created the Bureau of Departmental Oversight? The Director Snodgrass paused, consulting her clipboard. Actually, I'm not sure. The authorization documents are filed somewhere in the archives of historical administrative decisions, but those archives are organized according to the Dewey Decimal System as modified by the Council of Numerical Classification Standardization, and the index was last updated in the year 2847. So nobody knows who originally decided that complex problems require complex evaluation systems. Well, no. But it's always been done that way, and nobody has ever questioned whether it actually works. Questioning established procedures would require authorization from the Committee on Procedural Questioning. And I suppose the Committee on Procedural Questioning requires oversight from some other committee. Naturally, the Department of Question Management. Octavius felt a familiar sensation that he had learned to recognize as the human urge to bang one's head against the nearest solid object. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried a different approach. "Director," he said calmly, "let me ask you a simple question. Are you happy with the current effectiveness of galactic government? Happiness is irrelevant. What matters is proper procedure. But are the procedures achieving the results you want? The procedures are being followed correctly, but are they producing good outcomes for the citizens? Citizens are required to adapt to governmental procedures, not the other way around. But what if the procedures are making life harder for citizens instead of easier? Then the citizens need better training in procedure compliance. Or maybe the procedures need to be changed. Procedures can't be changed without proper authorization. From the Committee on Procedural Innovation, which meets once every 7 years. Exactly. But what if an urgent problem arises that can't wait 7 years? Then it will be addressed through emergency procedures. What are the emergency procedures? The Committee on Emergency Procedures meets within 6 months to evaluate the urgency of the situation and determine whether it qualifies for expedited review. And how long does expedited review take? Approximately 3 years. So your emergency response time is 3 years? That's actually quite fast. Emergency procedures used to take 5 years. Octavius stared at Director Snodgrass for a long moment, trying to process the logic of a system that considered 3 years to be a fast emergency response. "Director," he said finally, "I think I understand why humans are considered dangerous to galactic civilization. It's because they promote anarchistic thinking, because they've proven that government can actually work." "What do you mean?" "I mean they've created systems that actually solve problems instead of just managing them. They've shown that it's possible for government to help people instead of just creating more paperwork for them to fill out. But their systems are chaotic. Their systems are effective. When something doesn't work, they fix it. When citizens have problems, they try to solve them. When bureaucrats get in the way of progress, they find ways around them." That sounds terrifying. It is terrifying, but only if you're more committed to preserving bureaucracy than you are to helping people. At this point, Councillor Singh 12 raised her hand. "Agent Blunderbuss," she said, "I'd like to propose something." "What? What if we tried a very small pilot program, not to replace our existing systems, but just to see what happens?" The Committee on Experimental Procedure Evaluation would never approve it. "What if we didn't ask them?" The council chamber fell silent again. The concept of implementing a government program without proper committee approval was so revolutionary that several representatives' translators shut down completely. "Councillor Singh 12, the council speaker said slowly, "are you suggesting that we bypass established procedures?" "I'm suggesting that we try something new to see if it works better than what we're currently doing. But bypassing established procedures would be irregular. So, Irregular procedures could lead to unpredictable outcomes. Good. Maybe unpredictable outcomes would be better than the predictably awful outcomes we're getting now. This statement was met with enthusiastic applause from about a third of the assembled representatives, confused murmuring from another third, and appalled silence from the remainder. Order! The council speaker was now wielding his gavel like a weapon of mass percussion. Order! This assembly will not tolerate suggestions of procedural irregularity. Why not? Demanded Councillor Martinez 7. What's the worst that could happen? We might accidentally solve a problem quickly and efficiently. And that would be bad because it would set a precedent for expecting quick and efficient solutions. Heaven forbid. Exactly. Octavius watched this exchange with growing amusement. The galactic government had created a system so committed to avoiding change that it considered success to be a threat to institutional stability. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, standing up and addressing the assembly, I think this conversation has perfectly illustrated the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to governance. How so? Galactic government asks, how can we avoid making mistakes? Human government asks, how can we fix problems? You're optimized for preventing failure. They're optimized for achieving success. And those are completely different goals that require completely different strategies. But preventing failure is achieving success. No, preventing failure is preventing failure. Achieving success requires taking risks, trying new things, and accepting that some of them won't work. But if some of them don't work, then you've failed. Some individual attempts fail, but the overall system succeeds because you keep trying until you find something that works. That sounds inefficient. It's incredibly efficient. Instead of spending years planning one perfect solution, you spend weeks testing multiple possible solutions until you find one that actually works. But what about all the failed attempts? What about them? Each failed attempt teaches you something that makes the next attempt more likely to succeed. So failure is educational. Failure is inevitable. The question is whether you learn from it or pretend it didn't happen. Director Snodgrass consulted her clipboard again. Agent Blunderbuss, she said, you've given us a great deal to think about. And how long will you spend thinking about it? Well, this discussion will need to be documented and submitted to the Committee on Philosophical Implications of Procedural Innovation. And then, the committee will review our documentation and submit their recommendations to the Department of Recommendation Evaluation. And then, the department will coordinate with the Bureau of Coordination to ensure proper integration with existing philosophical frameworks. How long will this process take? Approximately 47 years. 47 years? That's actually quite reasonable. Complex philosophical questions require extensive deliberation. By the time you finish deliberating, I'll be dead. That's unfortunate, but proper philosophical analysis cannot be rushed. Octavius looked around the council chamber at the assembled representatives of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, all of whom seemed genuinely convinced that spending 47 years thinking about whether to try a solution that would take 47 days to implement was a reasonable approach to governance. You know what? He said finally. I think my work here is done, but we haven't implemented any of your suggestions. Exactly, and that's the most perfect demonstration of my point that I could possibly ask for. You've just spent 4 hours discussing the possibility of maybe considering whether to potentially think about trying a solution that humans would have implemented, tested, and improved upon during their lunch break. But proper consideration requires proper time. Proper consideration requires proper proportion. You don't need 47 years to decide whether to spend 47 days trying something new. But what if the 47-day experiment has consequences that last longer than 47 days? Then you adjust. That's what humans do. They try things, see what happens, and adapt accordingly. But adaptation requires abandoning established procedures. Sometimes, and that's okay, procedures exist to serve people, not the other way around. With that, Octavius gathered his coffee-stained napkins and headed for the exit. "Agent Blunderbuss," Director Snodgrass called after him. "Where are you going?" "Back to Earth," he replied. "I have a job helping people solve problems instead of creating them. It's actually quite fulfilling. But what about the galactic government?" "The galactic government will do exactly what it's always done. Nothing. And maybe that's for the best. Some systems are so broken that the kindest thing you can do is let them collapse under their own weight." That's a terrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. And honesty is the first step toward change. But change is dangerous. Stagnation is more dangerous. At least change offers the possibility of improvement. And with that, Octavius walked out of the Galactic Council chambers and returned to his small apartment on Earth, where he continued his work, helping humans navigate bureaucratic challenges while writing his second book, Why Complex Problems Don't Always Require Complex Solutions, a former bureaucrat's guide to getting things done. Daril. The book became a bestseller throughout the galaxy, though most galactic citizens had to order it through black market distributors, since the Department of Literature approval had classified it as potentially seditious material that might encourage inappropriate expectations regarding governmental efficiency. 3 years later, Octavius received a message from Counselor Singh 12, informing him that several star systems had quietly begun implementing human-style pilot programs without seeking proper authorization. The results were so dramatically positive that word was spreading throughout the galaxy, despite official attempts to suppress information about irregular procedural innovations. "The revolution has begun," she wrote. "It's small, it's quiet, and it's completely unauthorized. In other words, it's perfectly human." Octavius smiled, sipped his morning coffee, and began composing his reply. "That's the beautiful thing about good ideas. They don't need permission to work." The map was still glowing red, but now everyone understood what that really meant. Earth wasn't dangerous because humans were aggressive conquerors or advanced warriors. Earth was dangerous because humans had figured out how to make government actually serve its citizens, and that idea was more revolutionary than any weapon ever conceived.